Judges stage, and that incorporates Judges, Ruth, and the first part of the first book of Samuel. Judges, we know that would include Samson, Gideon, Deborah, Barak, and of course Ruth, Naomi, Boaz were in that era. Boaz being like a great-grandfather of David. We see that was when God went from, having a specific leader appointed by God, like Moses and Joshua were, to a time of judges. And these people were set up as judges. And we all know the pattern of the book of Judges. They would get this judge, they'd get things right, there'd be peace in the land until that judge died, and then everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and they went right back to this heathen time of not really following God. And then God would have to bring another judge, and yada, yada, yada. So that brings us into right where we're getting close to where we're at today, the United Kingdom stage. The United Kingdom, we're not talking about England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales. We're talking about the United Kingdom, the good kingdom that God set up. God said, all right, you don't want these judges. You didn't want to follow Joshua and Moses and everything they wanted to do. That pattern's not working anymore. The judges definitely didn't work. They're crying out for a king, crying out for a king. He brings the prophet Samuel in. Samuel has to usher in Saul. And then we see the true King David come into effect. It was David then ushering in this united, this good kingdom stage. And that incorporates the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, the first part of Kings, 1st Chronicles, and even the first part of 2nd Chronicles, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. We're all written around that era. Next, we have the era where we're studying right now is the chaotic kingdom stage. Most of the prophets that we will be studying in the next several weeks are in the chaotic kingdom stage. The only other prophets and the minor prophets that we're going to study were in the captivity or return stage, most of them in the return stage of, by the time we study Obadiah, Joel, Jonah, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Micah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and Lamentations, we get to the point, obviously we know that Jeremiah and Lamentations, that's about when God sent the people out. It's called exile, the exilic stage. So God had sent these people out into exile, and that's when the prophecies kind of stopped. They were like, look, you've pushed God far enough. He's going to now exile you. Jeremiah was known as the weeping prophet because of things like that. So we're in this stage that incorporates the time of 1 Kings, chapters 12 through 22, 2 Kings, and the end of 2 Chronicles. So the events that you see in 2 Chronicles, 2 Kings, and the second half of 1 Kings are outlined in this same era. So the people and the places are in similar time that they would be when we read Amos. So Amos specifically, as we've already said, time of Uzziah, time of Jeroboam II, he was, bringing a serious statement, and God we've talked about how God used different people at different times to prophesy in different ways. Obviously, God used Ezekiel as this just cinematic, visual, crazy man to get a hold of the people's attention. He used Jeremiah to just cry all the time. He used, different people. Isaiah was this messianic, this beautifully poetic prophet who had this kind of high stature and this royalty to him. And yet he said some pretty harsh things, but we almost always think of Isaiah as the nicer prophet, because he constantly was going back to, but God's going to bring you back, but God is going to bring the Messiah, but God is going to usher in Emmanuel, God is with us, this wonderful counselor. And we got all these beautiful names for the Messiah and beautiful images in Isaiah, but God did something unique with Amos, and let's get back to him. Amos meant burden. His name means burden. Obviously, a prophetic name. Most Israelites had prophetic names. They were named for something that was happening at the time of their birth, or something that their parents foresaw, or even was actually prophesied to be foreseen in their life, to happen in their life. So his name means burden, and there's two assumptions on this. Obviously, one's pretty accurate. He would see the burden of the Lord. A prophecy was many times referred to as a burden of the Lord. I had a burden of the Lord that came to prophet so-and-so, and then he spoke and wrote. Or a burden came through a vision. And some people even say that because of his low stature, this was probably one of the homeliest prophets that we'll see in the Bible. He was not born into the school of prophets. He was not meant to be a prophet. Nobody thought he would be a prophet. And you even get this kind of high and mighty false priest that comes against him in chapter 7. We're going to read a little bit of that here in a minute. And this guy's like, look, we don't have to listen to you. You're not even a real prophet. And he's like, you're right. I'm not born of a prophet. My father was not a prophet. I'm not in the school of prophets. I'm a sheep breeder and a fig picker. I pick sycamore figs were the wildest figs out there. Poor man's figs. They'd have to go up and cut the bottoms off of them to ripen them. So this guy would be climbing trees all day, probably while he was herding and breeding his own sheep. Now, one of the words, I saw one interesting commentary about the kind of sheep that he bred. He bred probably the ugliest, scraggliest, smallest sheep in all of Israel. So this guy was rural, right? This is like Country Joe Bumpkin coming into town going, you know what the Lord tell me to say to you? You need to get right, brother. You know, and like you're like, I don't want to listen to this. Like I don't want a guy getting up in a flannel shirt and Carhartts with work boots on. It has mud or sheep poop on him. I don't want to hear him tell me what to do. All right? Yeah, he looks kind of like Bernie over there. Bernie's like, I got poop on my shoes. I feel like I could be in the Bible. And that's actually where I'm going with this. You know, what if God could use this non-eloquent, you know, kind of brutish, brash, like rough and tumble guy to kind of come into town and really tell everybody how it should be, you know? Sometimes God will use the messenger. We'll see in the book of Jonah, it was a lot more about the messenger than it was the message. I mean, a guy comes in with seaweed wrapped around his head, bleached white. He had to be bleached white because he was in that whale's belly. And they're kind of, what? You know, I mean, he looked like a ghost. He probably looked like a god to them. He probably looked like an idol. He looked crazy, you know, and he's just like, 40 days repent. You know, like, what a message there, guy, you know, awesome. And it took him so long to get there that God had to use that messenger. I mean, obviously, whatever's going to come out of this guy's mouth, they were going to listen to because he was crazy looking. And Ezekiel the same way. And so I just wanted to get, you know, this idea of who this guy was, okay? Who is God going to use to go to these people? And sometimes he picks the most unlikely of characters. And what did we just read yesterday in 1 Corinthians? Not many noble, not many mighty, you know, not many learned. You know, and he goes on in, I think, 1 Corinthians 1 and 2 to talk about how, like, it doesn't matter what our intellect is. It doesn't matter how smart we are. You know, we were praying this morning. It's about being humble. Lord, break me. Make me usable, moldable. I want to be the clay on the wheel that you can actually use. And that was an image he used from Jeremiah. And I'm really interested. This gets my attention more than some of the other books in the Old Testament and other books in the Bible, because we really get a little bit of a view of who this guy was. And remember how I've tried to track this continual usage of blow the trumpet in Zion? I said, let's look for that in every book, right? Well, I don't think those words are actually found in Amos. I mean, I haven't looked into every chapter like really deep and really found the words blow the trumpet. But it's interesting because we see in the... Let's read the first verse of Amos. It's the prologue, the introduction. The words of Amos, who was among the sheep breeders of Tekoa, it's right there, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam II, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. So we get who are the kings at the time. We get he's a sheep breeder, he's from Tekoa, and there's 2 years before the earthquake. Now, you guys know what Tekoa means? This is just interesting to me because I'm finding this as a running theme. It means to pierce or to blow the trumpet.